Hi everyone, thank you for being here at SURG Semesterly Symposium. So today we have a couple audience members here, and we have a lot of audience members on Zoom, which includes some mentors and faculty, and then also just audience who couldn't make it in person. So as Emma said, we'll be kind of standing within these lines just so that our Zoom audience can see us all. Just to introduce ourselves, I'm Priya. I'm the co-president of SURG.
I'm Joyce. I'm the co-president with Priya.
I'm Emma. I'm the VP of Internal Development.
And then Chelsea.
Oh, I'm Chelsea, and I'm VP of Professional Development.
And she's also a researcher today, so she'll be in her researcher role for today. So we're gonna go ahead and start symposium. Just to introduce SURG, we are an undergraduate research group, student-run, student-led, and we do research under the UN SDGs. We were originally affiliated with the Office of Sustainability, and also the UCOP Carbon Neutrality Initiative. And today we are here at our semesterly symposium.
And this semester we have 29 awesome student researchers, you all, 4 research committees, and with work focused around 17 SDGs.
So we're going to start off with the Harmful Algal Blooms Committee. If y'all could come up here, and you'll see slides like this. These are the transition slides.
And please try to stay in the frame of the Zoom.
All right, you got this.
So, hi everyone. Our committee is focused on harmful algal blooms in Tierra del Fuego. So I'm Amora. I'm the committee lead.
I'm Lillian.
I'm Theo.
I'm Imogene. I'm Nasia.
And I'm Sophia.
In terms of an overview of our project, we are focused on harmful algal blooms. Harmful algal blooms, otherwise known as HABs, are an ongoing global threat to aquatic ecosystems and are highly correlated to rising temperatures. These temperatures are rising because of anthropogenic or human-induced global activity. And given the recent changing temperature trends within South America, the likelihood of harmful algae blooms may be more frequent in Tierra del Fuego, otherwise known as Land of Fire, which is located at the southernmost tip of mainland South America. Currently, there exists a gap within published scientific research that gives a comprehensive summary of the multifaceted effects and impacts of harmful algae blooms within Tierra del Fuego. Therefore, this project aims to explore the causes and trends associated with HABs on Tierra del Fuego's ecosystems, society, and economy, while also producing comprehensive solutions. Some of our research questions are as follows. What are the impacts of harmful algae blooms on Tierra del Fuego's aquatic ecosystem, society, and economy? What natural and/or anthropogenic phenomena has impacted harmful algae blooms in Tierra del Fuego? And the rest can be on the slide.
SDGs are the Sustainable Development Goals developed by the UN to form a collective on the well-being of human health and our planet. So the main SDGs in our research is 6, clean water and sanitation, 11, sustainable cities and communities, and number 14, life below water.
So first, we'll begin with an introduction to harmful algal blooms. So algae and cyanobacteria can sometimes cause harm to people, animals, and the environment. They form blooms when they grow out of control. And so when water is warm, still, and nutrient-rich, blooms can form especially fast, and they can occur in all types of water, including fresh, salt, and brackish. They can also be many colors, including green, blue, or brown. Harmful algal blooms wreak havoc through releasing toxins, using too much oxygen and more. Toxin production is affected by many factors, including light, temperature, and salinity. Researchers expect more severe HAVs to occur in coming years as climate change continues and there will be more temperature increases.
As said before, Tierra del Fuego is located at the southernmost tip of South America between Argentina and Chile, and has a diverse array of ecosystems, creating a biosphere reserve. Some of these ecosystems include mountainous terrains, dense subpolar forests, peatlands, grasslands, and glaciers. All these are interconnected and are very reliant on the temperature that Tierra del Fuego provides. And the temperature is characterized by cool temperatures, robust winds, and frequent precipitation. But due to climate change and global and ocean atmospheric mechanisms such as El Niños, La Niñas, hurricanes, and storms, we are seeing an increase in ocean and land temperatures, leading to a surge of detrimental algal blooms, specifically in South America and Tierra del Fuego.
As for some more specific history on the region, Tierra del Fuego used to be pristine, but then it experienced indigenous extinction in 2 centuries because of the Chilean government. This was because of the colonization, and this had a fatal impact specifically on the Yamana people who were faced forced cultural changes, discrimination, and language loss. As for the current ecological stuff, glaciologist findings reveal significant glacier retreat, especially recently, right? Highlighting climate change threats to the region's landscape. And some other immediate challenges are water scarcity. Some specific effects on parts of Tierra del Fuego are exemplified in Bell Bay. So basically in 1972, 3 fishermen died from shellfish poisoning caused by dinoflagellate producing paralytic shellfish toxin, or PST for short. And basically this is from intense blooms of microalgae, which cause this disease, but then also lead to fish kills, and not just for humans, and especially impacts salmon. Some natural events in the area are El Nino, like we mentioned, the southern annular mode, and some other anthropogenic activities are negatively impacting the area as well. Another place that harmful effects of these algal blooms are exemplified are the Beagle Channel, where there is PSP from the PST, which is paralytic shellfish poisoning. And this has impacted the channel since 1886, when there was especially a major outbreak in 1992. And these outbreaks peak in the summer.
Okay, so now I will introduce everyone to the biology of harmful algal blooms. So they occur when colonies of algae grow out of control. And they're triggered by an influx of nutrients in the water, and particularly nitrogen and phosphorus. These sources can be natural or anthropogenic, and natural sources include, for example, the natural nutrient cycling phenomenon known as upwelling, as well as wildfires. And we should note that wildfires are becoming increasingly common because of climate change as well. Other sources are anthropogenic, including agriculture, like agricultural runoff, sewage discharge, climate change, and salmon farming.
And then going into dinoflagellates, like previously mentioned, they're a group of single-celled algae that are primarily responsible for harmful algal blooms. They're actually often essential to marine ecosystems, illustrated by their symbiotic relationship with corals. However, dinoflagellates that have lost their ability to photosynthesize are the primary cause for harmful algal blooms. And it's important to note that not all algal blooms are detrimental. In most instances, they're pretty beneficial to marine ecosystems, as they serve as a crucial food source for marine animals, which plays a major role in fueling the ocean's food chain.
I also wanted to note that most anthropogenic sources of these nutrient influxes are the primary causes for the rise in HABs in Tierra del Fuego, in the water bodies of Tierra del Fuego. And here on figure 3, you can see the effects of climate change on HABs and as well as their consequences.
Moving on to society and economy, Ushuaia, Argentina is the primary economic center in Tierra del Fuego. Its economy relies on port activity along with natural resources such as aquaculture. Harmful algae, their blooms, and the toxins that they release have been hurting economies in Tierra del Fuego. While phytoplankton, as mentioned, are vital for healthy marine ecosystems, some can form toxic compounds that can negatively impact the environment.
These HABs can cause economic losses, affect tourism, and kill aquatic species. Furthermore, they can also hurt humans who consume fisheries. And the economic activities that contribute to HABs, as I said before, are intensive agriculture, wastewater disposal and discharge, carbon positive activities. So any activity that emits carbon into the atmosphere contributing to climate change, which affects HABs, and also salmon farming.
So our research primarily centered on a literature review, which provides some limitations in our overall research, such as we are not able to go to Tierra del Fuego or talk to the local inhabitants or experts in the field of algal blooms. Overall, as you've seen from this presentation, HABs are an overall hazard to human health and ecological integrity. If they're consumed by animals or humans, it can lead to severe health effects and even death in some cases. It also depletes O2, which severely affects aquatic organisms and can cause problems with the salmon economy. There is also, due to intensified El Niños and more severe weather events, we are seeing more of the glaciers melt and retreat, and also rising temperatures in the ocean. So effective management for HABs so far, the most prevalent one is using clay. So as you can see in figure 4, it kind of shows the process of it, but basically they drop this species of clay into the water, and as it sinks, it collects the HAB cells and other particles and brings them to the bottom of the ocean. And there they have no access to sunlight, so they can't photosynthesize, so they end up dying there. Another, if we think about how they're coming, algal blooms are coming more frequent due to climate change, there's also a market for algae products, such as biofuels, food, agriculture, and even cosmetics. But these processes require a lot of energy, money, and new technologies that are not invented yet. So overall, from our research, we saw a lack of scientific research for utilizing algae, but also just in general about harmful algal blooms. And we hope in the future, more scientists and researchers will prioritize this phenomenon since it is affecting people and the environment due to climate change. If you have questions, feel free to ask them.
For the possible solutions to algal blooms, I was wondering if you guys could talk a little bit more about like the benefits and drawbacks, and like if you guys have out of curiosity, if you guys like have a vision or affinity or leaning toward certain solutions.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. So the clay one is the most most used, and it causes the least ecological damage since like clay doesn't really impact environments that much, especially if it sinks to the bottom. There is like other research on like biological, chemical, and like physical controls, but all these are not like tested enough in the actual environment, so they don't know if they cause ecological damage, because there is like a few like toxins that they can like insert into the water and kill all the HAB cells too, but they don't know like the ongoing long-lasting effects of what can cause the environment.
Okay, thank
Thank
you,
you.
everyone.
So, hi everyone, we are the Air Pollution on Campus group, and then today we're going to present on what we have done for this semester. So our full name is Air Pollution Distribution and Influence on Berkeley Campus Analysis and Recommendations. So I'm Jawen.
I'm Jordan.
I'm Chelsea.
I'm Yusei.
I'm Mira.
I'm Amelia.
I'm Shamal. So yeah. So why air pollution? So Berkeley is one of the most sustainable campus in US, as we state by ourselves, but we did not have a clear target on air pollutants to regulate. And then air pollution is one of the 4 environment issues in the Bay Area among wildfires, extreme precipitation, and sea level rise. It can show the sustainable transition process, and it can also help us understand how Berkeley campus is doing on verification on its policy. So we put on a lot of relevant SDGs, including number 3, good health, number 4, quality education, number 7, renewable energy, number 11, sustainable cities and communities, and number 13, climate actions. So for our research for the data part, we put our scope on the Berkeley main campus, and then we used the purple air sensor on campus, finding air, PM 2.5 and PM 10 air pollutants to test on. We can see on this map that actually most of the sensors is located on the north side of the campus. So actually our data itself is a little bit biased because people are not putting enough sensors on the south side to showing that on this side. So most of our data will be inside the campus, and there's some of them outside, which we did not consider.
As for some background on PM 2.5, there are several guidelines regarding PM 2.5 concentrations. One of the most prominent one is WHO guideline, which states for the annual mean of PM 2.5, they want it under 5 milligrams per cubic meter and 15 milligrams per cubic, no, not million, micrograms per cubic meter for a 24-hour mean. And for the national and California is a bit stricter compared to the national standards. So these are the 3 guidelines we've considered. And as for the average daily mean PM 2.5 concentration, there's a general decline. However, around 2020, there's again like a spike that goes up. So we think this like air pollution issue is very relevant to us in 2023. And as for PM 2.5 data, these were, as Jawen introduced earlier, these were data extracted from the purple air sensors on campus and around the surrounding area of Berkeley. And this left image is from March 2023 to May 23, and then the right is from August to October. And as we can see, there's several peaks that extend to the red zone for August and October, which indicates potential health risks due to air pollution exposure. And the average for March to May is 1.32. And then the one from August to October is 8.03, which is 6 times worse. And the reason behind this, we assume one reason that could kind of explain this phenomenon is California's wildfires, and California's peak fire season is during July to October. And I think many of you saw the warn me about the air pollution exposure during September 18 to September 25 with Northwest California and Oregon's wildfires, where a lot of PM 2.5 was emitted and was carried by wind around to the Bay Area, which worsened air quality around here. And around 90% of total particulate mass emitted from wildfires are indeed PM 2.5. And another factor we considered is the spatial variation. And as earlier John said, a lot of our sensors that we investigated were around the north area, so it's a bit biased, but there's variability due to like location and also like conditions of individual sensors. There could be sensors located in the same position, but depending on like the altitude and stuff, the readings could kind of differ.
Yeah, one of the reasons we wanted to explore this topic is because although like across locations on campus, the effects from the wildfires, which were like 250 miles away, might be the same. Much of the daily pollution levels, like this is the wildfire time period, but like before and after that, much of the daily pollution is due to like more local events such as vehicle traffic as well as construction. So we wanted to actually examine the effects of a site being close to the main road or close to a construction site to see which areas on campus are more vulnerable to pollution. So that's why we compared PM 2.5 and PM 10 levels. And if you want to go to the next slide, our hypothesis was that in construction sites, you see a lot of PM 2.5 emission because you're using like a lot of mechanical processes, you're moving a lot of heavy earth. So a lot of like soil and dust gets polluted, and we'd see more PM 10. But PM 2.5 comes more from combustion of fossil fuels. So we hypothesized that in sites that are really close to main roads, we'll see greater amounts of PM 2.5, and that in sites closer to construction sites, we'll see greater amounts of PM 10. So what we did was we controlled, we hypothesized that the effects from the wildfire will be the same when we compared Hillgard Hall to Stanley Hall. So Hillgard Hall is right next to a construction site and the main road. Stanley Hall is a little farther away from the construction site and the main road. So we estimate that Hillgard Hall should have greater daily amounts of pollution, but they should have the same amount of pollution from the wildfire. And what we found was that the average in Hillgard was higher by 8 micrograms per cubic meter, which shows us that yes, in fact, this does have more PM 2.5 emissions, and it could be due to being close to the main road. But just to control for the fact that the sensors could face different altitudes or just be more or less sensitive to each other, we found out how much of a perturbation happened during the wildfire. And we see that if you subtract these two, it was actually less. It was actually less of a perturbation in Hillgard Hall, which means that this sensor was not more sensitive to PM 2.5 than that one, and that the difference was in fact being due to the main road as well as the construction site. If you want to go to the next slide.
And now we will go into the sustainability plan that was created by UC Berkeley. And its goals were focused on to achieving most of it by 2020. It was originally released in 2009, and the goal was to lower carbon emissions on campus, being it lower than it was 30 years ago. And it focuses on UC Berkeley's policies and goals, and then also the UC's goals. And it will split into 5 vision statements. So then the plan would focus on the 5 specific goals that we'll go into.
Yeah, so the 5 vision statements are as follow: climate and resiliency, which accelerate equitable transition to clean energy, zero carbon campus; build a natural environment, which emphasizes sustainable development; renew facilities and enhance ecosystem biodiversity. The third one is sustainability services, which manage campus operations and minimize environmental impacts within the environment Berkeley's resources. The fourth one is health and sustainability, to promote well-being and access to sustainable and healthy options. And the fifth one is culture and learning, which emphasizes diversity and inclusive campus culture of sustainability, empowering leadership and problem solving. So the first statement, vision statement, climate and resiliency, emphasizes the carbon neutrality 2025 pathway. This includes emissions and building electrification and green building practices. They emphasize expanding low and non-carbon energy supply for powerful and thermal needs, and increase efficiency and less carbon fuels in fleet vehicles. It also emphasizes zero carbon by 2050 or sooner pathway. Currently in 2023, we are achieving the carbon neutrality from Berkeley Scope 3 sources, which include commute, air travel, and water and waste emissions. And there's efforts to update main campus heating, cooling, and power systems that operate in clean energy by 2030. The second vision statement is built in natural environment, which includes land use, energy and carbon neutrality, new buildings and major modifications. being said, not connected to the main campus energy system, having renewable energy. This includes all electric, site solar PV, battery storage, 100% clean energy. Also to reduce energy use in carbon constructions, materials, and projects. The second one is sustainable water, which reduced growth adjusted portable water by consumption by 36% in 2025, and new standards for construction of large renovations, which includes water use intensity, LEED water credits, and gray water evaluation.
So the third section goes into sustainability services. And the first part is green operations. So on campus, we have a Cal Zero Waste team that goes into the plan of reduce and reuse. And so on campus, you can see around the like landfill, compost, and recycling bins. And in the plan, we want to promote more of that and have signage on bins so people know where to throw away their trash. And their goal was to reduce waste 25% per capita by 2025 and 50% by 2030. And another thing is going into eliminating single-use plastic. So by July 1st, 2021, the goal was to replace single-use foodware and accessories such as plastic bags, and having that with maybe compostable utensils. So on campus, you can see a lot of that being promoted as well. And the plan was also to look into researching what other alternatives that can be replaced for single-use plastic. And another thing is having more greener labs. So on campus, we have laboratories, and the goal is to also have more efficient equipment and tracking the chemical usage and hazardous waste. And then also bringing in more of the lab community, such as instructors and students, and having them be more educated on the information in the labs, and also having a guide on lab waste disposal. And then the fourth section was health and sustainability. So this one is promoting food services and health and wellness. So for food services, we want to look into more plant-forward menus and having that reduce the greenhouse gas emissions, and then tracking the food purchases with that. And for health and wellness, we want to look into providing more healthy or more access to tap water, and having more people understand the benefits of that. And then in workspaces, just reducing workplace injuries by having more ergonomic designed equipment, and then having work from home. And then the fifth one would be culture and learning. So promoting more of the sustainability practices into academics and research. So another thing is bringing that into minors and majors and more popular undergrad courses, so more students are aware about it. And then having sustainability practices and professional development where the staff on campus are more aware of the sustainability practices in orientations, campus events, and athletic games.
Okay, so our policy recommendation, basically the background is at UC Berkeley. At UC Berkeley, there are no current environmental education requirements that are broad across all campus, all across all colleges. A local high school, our high school in Berkeley, Berkeley High, has enacted and passed a climate literacy resolution, but UC Berkeley has not followed in their footsteps. So our problem statement is, as the climate crisis worsens day by day and natural disasters are becoming more frequent, students are still not adequately prepared with necessary knowledge to understand and make sustainable choices to fight climate change.
So our recommendation is that UC Berkeley instates an environmental education course requirement across all 14 colleges, and for UC Berkeley to publish its progress towards sustainability goals. So as we just went over with this Sustainability Plan 2020, so it's saying a lot of goals, but it's not exactly saying like a timeline or a specific like progress. There's no like update. It's just like it was just published in 2020, and we don't really know like how we're progressing towards that. So we would like for UC Berkeley to create a easy to read website with accessible language that has timelines and continuously updated progress towards achieving all these different goals. And this is to ensure accountability that UC Berkeley actually is moving towards its goals and transparency. So this is an example of a page from the 2020 sustainability plan. So we would just like to add like the timeline section and the progress section to this, because this has so much great information, but we just don't know like current.
And kind of following along with that, even I, who am studying environment, kind of had some difficulties understanding a lot of the sustainability plans. They use a lot of language that is really confusing, and it's just blah, blah, blah for a lot of it. So we would just kind of concise that down. And following along with that, so basically the environmental education requirement would have a 1 semester course requirement in every college that covers climate change education, and it would cover like the environmental impact of decisions we make, sustainable lifestyle choices, and also talking about how different communities are disproportionately affected by climate change, and just general knowledge that we believe every student here should know. And we recommend that UC Berkeley develop a climate literacy center on campus that consists of students and staff eager to spread climate literacy through trainings, course developments, and research and resources. And this would kind of vary different from like what SURG and other organizations here are doing on campus. It would be a specific task force to work on more educational like curriculum development. So this is an example from the UC Berkeley page from LNS, and it says there's no explicit environmental breadth. So this is an example that shows that you do not have to learn environment to be able to go through your undergraduate education. It can count as, you know, a science, but it's not required. So steps to achieve would basically be recruiting teachers and staff interested in climate advocacy through outreach and other environmental student organizations, and recruiting students and together develop curriculum and resources to make that 1 semester. UC San Diego has already implemented such a thing, so it is possible in the UCs. We just have not done so yet. And this is a really great quote by Robert Swan, that the greatest threat to our planet is the belief that someone else will save it, saying that we really need to act on it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank you, my co-lead together with Jordan, and then also the person that is not here, Nikhil, who's working on the data group as well. Any questions?
So it seemed like a lot of the information that was collected through the data, it was not like the source was from fires and also the roads. So I was wondering if there were any solutions that would mitigate that, and also feel free to correct me if I understand this one.
Okay, so I can go through it a little bit. For PM 2.5 and PM 10, as we viewed it, fire events are not going to change, and it's going to be worsened by events as climate change. This is very unfortunately due to both decrease of precipitation and increase of temperature. On the other hand, for the roads, we are assuming that California is the one of the fastest community that is changing into electrifying their vehicles. And we are assuming that we are going to see around 50% of electric vehicles before 2035. So that will be a very big change. However, as Berkeley campus is developing for constructions, we might see a changing, like a squeezing up and down in air pollution for at least 10 years due to school need to build a lot of new buildings on campus. So yeah.
Oh, and I'll just add to that. Another contributor to PM10 was the construction sites, and we found that in places near the construction sites, there's about like 10.3 micrograms per meter cubed of PM10 versus away from the construction sites is closer to 7.5 micrograms per meter cubed. So obviously once the construction is over, I don't know how long that'll take, maybe a few years or something like that, we should see that number go down a little bit.
Yeah, I had one more question. Thank you so much. I'm just curious if you could say again where the sensors were.
Oh yeah, so I actually have a picture here of the 2 sensors that I directly compared. It's not on the slideshow, but as you can see, the Hillgard sensor is where that green dot is. And sorry, it's a little small, but yeah, I don't know. It's not on the slideshow.
No, we can use this. Okay, so one of them is here. One of them is here, right?
Yeah. correct?
Yeah.
So the Hillgard one's right here, the construction site's right there, and this is the main road, and then the Stanley one is right here.
Yeah.
Where that 17 is, and the construction site for that is closer to this side and this side, but there's some building obstruction, so that's why the construction site emission is less for the Stanley Hall one.
Okay, yeah. Also, unfortunately, we have this construction site, and here is a new one here. So we have 3 construction sites, 100% covering the whole campus. So every place will be similar polluted on these days.
If half of the here and half there. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we are the GMOs and Agriculture Committee and exploration into GMOs and seed saving.
Hi, everyone. I'm Camilla.
I'm Zoe. I'm Alice.
I'm Brandon. I'm Adrian.
I'm Kate. And I'm Bia. So these are the applicable SDGs to our project. Number 2, Zero Hunger. Number 9, Industry, Innovation, and Infrastructure. Number 15, Life on Land, just to kind of set the stage. So the definition of a GMO is what we're going to start with. A genetically modified organism contains DNA that has been altered using genetic engineering. Genetically modified animals are mainly used for research purposes, while genetically modified plants are common in today's food supply, really highlighting the importance of our project to agriculture. So I'm going to talk about the 3 different types of genetic modifications. There's traditional crop breeding that's been used for over 10,000 years. That includes back crossing inbreeding, hybrid breeding, and mutation breeding. Then we have genetic engineering, which the main difference between these 2 is the foreign genetic material. So with genetic engineering, you can copy a gene with a desired trait in one organism and then put it into another organism. So that's where that foreign genetic material comes from. And then genome editing doesn't include any foreign genetic material, and it's really great because it can enable targeted and precise changes to a genome, and it really makes the whole genetically engineering situation a lot faster, and it really accelerates the applications of new cultivars to smallholder farmers, and it's relatively inexpensive.
All right, so I'm sure when you hear GMOs, you think of bad, don't get that product. But here are some really important benefits and drawbacks to make it a more well-rounded take. Some benefits of GMOs is it allows higher quantities of food to be produced and mass produced. And tied with that, the seeds that are made with GMOs are less resistant to climate change and ecological shifts. And then some important drawbacks to consider are the ethical and social concerns, which is tied later into the presentation. But the benefits of GMOs, the GMOs may not equally be distributed because it is a technology. Small farmers might not have access to this, and larger corporations can kind of mass produce agriculture with GMOs without kind of giving this technology to smaller populations.
So our case study for GMOs was about BT crops, in which scientists genetically modify crops by inserting them with BT or RNAi traits to make them less susceptible to pests and insects through integrated pest risk management programs. This decreases the use of pesticides and insecticides. It helps to avoid super pests. It additionally can help increase crop yield. And then the 2 areas where we looked at this was BT cotton in China, which was designed to be resistant towards aphids, and BT maize in Brazil, which was designed to be resistant towards armyworms.
Okay, so in contrast to GM crops, seed saving is a more traditional agricultural process.
So seed saving is the practice of saving seeds or other reproductive material, vegetables, grain, herbs, and flowers for use from year to year for annuals and nuts, tree fruits, and berries for perennials and trees. So this is the way that farms have been maintained for about the past 12,000 years. And this usually involves the use of seed banks. So storage of plant material in a seed bank is one way of avoiding many of the problems of genetic erosion or selective change in genetic constitution, which occur when plants are cultivated under artificial conditions.
So the definitions of seed sovereignty and food sovereignty are very relevant to this topic. The definition of seed sovereignty is the right of any farmer to save, use, exchange, and sell their own seeds. And the primary issue that seed sovereignty seeks to address is the ownerships of seeds, as a larger majority of seeds are becoming property of several major agricultural and seed corporations. And then the definition of food sovereignty is the right of people to healthily and culturally appropriate their food that's produced through ecologically sound, sustainable methods. And it is within their right to define their own food and agricultural production methods.
So with seed saving, there's various benefits and drawbacks. As for the benefits first, it's the fact that with seed saving, the way that it's done, it leans toward and enables community autonomy and decision making on the horizontal level rather than a stratified or done by a few people level. With food systems, this in general promotes food sovereignty, which is their ability to make decisions on that. Furthermore, with seed saving, the way that it's done, it improves biodiversity, which fortifies food ecosystems, which is in general beneficial. And lastly, the cultural aspect of seed saving lends itself toward the preservation of intergenerational knowledge, community, and history. As for the drawbacks, there's the fact that with seed banks, which is the way that seed saving is generally accompanied with, there's a possible increased possibility of a threat to harvest or threat to the loss of these seeds. Furthermore, it's a more time-intensive process because there's less immediacy as opposed to genetic modification, where you can relatively rapidly select for a trait. And lastly, as a result of biodiversity, even though biodiversity improves the food ecosystem strength and resilience on a whole level, you will inevitably end up with seeds that show unfavorable traits that have low germination rates, things like that within your population of seeds.
And then a case study we look at is the Seed Savers Exchange in Iowa, which is a seed bank that saves 24,000 vegetable variations. And not only does it save the seeds, but also the history of it. And this is done by drying the seeds, freezing the seeds, or just conserving them. And 3 examples we looked at is the Grandpa Ott's Morning Glory, the Lorenzo Trissani Heirloom Safflower, and Bill Jumpsuit Peas. And this is all conserved in the seed bank where they are planted in a 10-year rotational cycle in order to conserve the history and the seeds of it.
Yeah, so all the researchers also did independent topics of interest that are loosely tied to that kind of more overall context that we just described, and that's what they're going to talk about now.
So I'll go first. I'm going to look at what I want to do is conceptualize GMOs in their political and economic context as they pertain to the agri-tech industry, which is the industry that produces GMOs. So first off, GMOs are commonly purported as being heavily associated with and contributing to economic development. And the GDP that is increases that are associated with economic development are generally understood to be indicators of life quality increases. But the question that I want to ask today is that really true? And when we see GDP increases, who is that actually benefiting? In the case of peasant farmers, that tends to not be the case. They are not the ones who reap the benefits of these GDP increases during economic development by GMOs. So we have to recognize that GMOs don't exist in a vacuum. Technology in general doesn't exist in a vacuum. They're inextricably linked to their political and economic contexts. In this case, GMOs are enabled by agri-tech industries, and agri-tech industries enter developing countries not just as a natural and neutral process, but are actively enabled to do so by neoliberal government policy, which includes a whole host of things which generally decreases food sovereignty, such as austerity measures, land reforms, adjustment policies, et cetera, et cetera. When we look specifically at the case study of seed saving within northern Malawi, we see that seed sharing, which is basically giving away seed after you're seed saving it, is something that is inextricably tied to family and place in northern Malawi. It's a very community driven effort. But the fact is that when we look at neoliberal policy, we see that it takes people away from their ties to family and place, both in the ways that it causes forced migrations due to land reforms, as well as the way that it commodifies seed and food, which disincentivizes seed sharing for free. Ultimately, the impact of this is that it erodes food sovereignty and ethnicides and forced assimilates peasant farmers because it strips them of their ways of life that are enabled by food sovereignty, their own food systems, and seed saving.
My topic is about biopiracy and seed saving, specifically with medicine. So what happens is indigenous knowledge is passed down with medicine and how seeds and plants are used. And 2/3 of the South depend on this method of using for medicine because they don't trust big pharma or they don't have the technologies to do so. However, when big corporations and the WTO comes into play, the WTO and big corporations are able to patent these types of seeds and plants in order to create ownership of them. An example of this is Monsanto, which not only patents GMOs, but pushes to reach towards plants that are grown by Indian and Asian farmers. And 2 examples of this we see is the rosy periwinkle from Madagascar, which is used for cancer drugs. And second is the milk thistle from Asia and Africa that is used for malaria-resistant drugs. And when big corporations are able to patent this, this means that smaller farmers aren't able to use their own types of plants they grow.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about the state of GMO regulation throughout different parts of the world. So to start, GMO regulation usually is categorized in 2 different ways: permissive versus prohibitive, and process-oriented versus product-oriented. So in the Americas, a lot of Latin American countries have some restriction on GMO use for cultivation, but many others, and including the US and Canada, allow majority of GMO use for cultivation, for research, for a lot. And the US does regulate all of that through the Federal and Drug Administration. On the other hand, Europe is very restrictive and process oriented. The European Union, because it encompasses all of Europe, allows for every country to fall under the same restriction. And they also have a system of civilian involvement, which allows people to voice their opinions to the union. Africa has a lot of large land that they use for GM crops. So initially they were very lenient and there was not a lot of restriction. However, recently many countries have started to ban a lot of GM use due to health concerns. And lastly, Asia is very permissive and process oriented because countries like China are very prominent in GM crop research. And of course, there are a lot of crop giants such as the Philippines. So it's very interesting to see that although some countries have a lot of land potential and potential for cultivation, they are starting to tighten up a lot on restrictions, whereas more industrial countries are starting to loosen up a lot.
So I'm going to discuss the purchasing behavior of non-GMO items by various consumers. So first of all, we must consider that socioeconomic factors are definitely going to influence perspectives on food and safety concerns related to the food that's consumed by those people. The survey found that 49% of higher income Americans felt more knowledgeable about global food systems in comparison to 28% of lower income individuals. And despite safety affirmations by the National Academy of Sciences, 43% of higher income and 26% of lower income individuals said that they avoided genetically engineered crops. So we can definitely see how income influences how consumers perceive like the chemicals and like the inputs that go into the food that they consume. More affluent people are going to be more concerned about their supposed health as opposed to poorer people who may not necessarily have that privilege cannot afford the privilege to think about those things. And this survey also found that there were a lot of misconceptions that persisted about the health benefits of quote unquote organic or non-GMO products, which was unsupported by research. And it was mostly just common like Western beliefs that were pushed onto these people about the food that they consume. And there are a lot of beliefs about healthier options that lead consumers to spend more or feel guilty if they're unable to, or for poorer people to feel guilty if they're unable to afford pricier items. Which leads to, again, more misconceptions related to the food that we consume. And overall, the survey found that household income shapes the access to information and attitudes about diets, but higher income doesn't consistently mean that they have a better collective understanding of what they're consuming. And then just like a brief example to the right, you can see that a popular health food store in LA called Erewhon mostly pertains to more affluent clientele, but it's not necessarily it doesn't necessarily equate to more healthy foods being consumed. It just means that more affluent people have this notion that pricier food items that don't include GMOs are better for long-term health, which is unsupported by research.
Thanks, and I wanted to touch upon the decline of family farms, starting with a specific example in Wisconsin. The Riekman family is 300K in debt, and they're a family or a small farm, which is kind of defined as generating 350K per year before expenses. They're $300,000 in debt, and some of the ways that they're making up that money is through like selling milk. And for example, you get $16 for every 100 pounds of milk. So, which is a 40% decrease in years prior. And as you can see, it's just been kind of dwindling down to farmers making up 2.6% of the workforce as of 1990. Some really interesting like mental health kind of consequences because of this is there's like this hotline called Farm Aid, which is 1-800 hotline. The usage of that has increased by 109% in the last year. And some of this has to do with like the decrease in prices. Others have to do with farmers leaving farms just stranded with like within a mile radius of all your closest family friends that have been there for generations, leaving to cities, because when they're leaving their work, they're leaving their legacy and they're leaving their family. Some of the reasons of why this is happening is because of the trade war. There's a 25% tariff on agricultural imports by China from the US. Some other kind of like more obvious is increased corporate farming. Essentially, when there's a bunch of mass-produced crops, it kind of that is done on such a big, like large scale because of like technology that large farmers have. It kind of just eliminates and makes small farms obsolete. So I just kind of want to bring to light what's happening like in the Midwest that you probably wouldn't have known. Thank you.
So lastly, I'm going to talk a little bit about the impact of growing your own food. We often wonder what we can do on an individual level to help promote our own well-being and also that of the planet. And it turns out that one of the most impactful actions is also one of the simplest, and that is growing a garden. And whether that's part of a wider community-led effort or just in your backyard or off a balcony of your apartment, various studies have shown the positive benefits of growing your own food. These include increased fruit and vegetable intake, exercise that's inherent in the process of gardening, along with stress reduction. This also produces opportunities for community building and forging new relationships, and it allows us to build deeper connections with the earth while preserving biodiversity through the planting of a variety of crops.
So we'd just like to thank the SURG presidents, Pri and Joyce, as well as SURG board and Timothy Bowles.
Are there any questions? Thank you.
Yep.
Hi, everyone. We are the Committee on Cannabis Farming, Environmental Social Impacts in Northern California. Our team, I'm Nicole, I'm the committee lead and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Bella, I'm a second year and I use she, her pronouns.
I'm Celeste, second year shooter. I'm Isabella, I'm a freshman shooter.
I'm Mia, sophomore shooter.
I'm Tiffany, I'm a junior, I use she, her.
Awesome. So here's an overview of what we're gonna go over today. So first off, about our project, just to give a quick little background, the use, sale, and cultivation of cannabis farming became legal in California in 2016. With that came a huge boost in the industry of cannabis farming and cultivation. But with that, we should also acknowledge that California is a big state and there's a lot of environmental degradation, water pollution, and a lot of marginalized communities facing these issues. So that's why we're focusing mainly on Northern California on our project. We decided to break down this project into 3 different sectors: nature, water, and urban. It's such a complex issue. And like I said, California is a big state. We even have to narrow it down to Northern California to really understand all the issues that are coming out of cannabis farming. With that, we started off this semester doing kind of like exploratory research and like foundational research to really solidify our background in cannabis farming and like the effects of it. And of course, in all these 3 different sectors. We'll go into the foundational questions a little bit more later once we break down into the sectors. But our main question is like, what are the environmental, social impacts of cannabis farming and cultivation in NorCal? Here are some connections to the Sustainable Development Goals. There's a lot, so I'll go over a few and really how they connect to our sectors. Right, like I mentioned, we have the nature sector. That's going to be dealing with life on land. It's also going to be dealing with good health and well-being. Water sector, of course, water and sanitation. Also good health and well-being. We all drink water. Animals and plants use water. And then finally, our urban sector, which is really looking at reduced inequalities and also responsible consumption and production. That's looking at the overall producing of the cannabis plant, often known as weed. Thought I put up that. Awesome. So this is our nature sector. We kind of went into 2 different questions, which you saw in the previous slide maybe, but this one was our main focus. It's how do the irregular cultivation and growing patterns of cannabis in North America disrupt the naturally occurring ecosystems and their species. So Bella's going to go ahead and present on that sector.
So we first wanted to focus on kind of cultivation and ecosystems within cannabis farming. So we focused on 3 different types of cultivation: legal, industrial, and illegal. So legal cultivation focuses on smaller farms in more rural areas with histories of like illegal and medicinal cultivation. And this type of cultivation leads to greater risks of forest fragmentation, stream modification, soil erosion, etc. Industrial cultivation is more focused on like commercial kind of implementation of cannabis, which focuses on like fewer larger farms in new areas or conducted for large scale industrial cultivation. And this kind of cultivation leads to like overexploitation of the natural environment because high demand for the weed generates need for high supply, weakening overall growth. And then illegal cultivation is cultivation outside of compliance with environmental laws. And it leads to more like wildlife poisoning, habitat destruction, pesticide contamination, etc. So next we focused on cultivation on wildlife, which is kind of the different animals affected by cannabis cultivation. Fish species are the coho, chinook salmon, and the steelhead. And then mammals. Kind of the main 3 we focused on were the fisher, which is a type of like ferret animal, the coastal martin, and the northern spotted owl. Main consequences associated with cannabis cultivation on animals were loss and degradation of habitat because of the farming and different ways in which cannabis is kind of focused on these habitats. Direct virality, such as death of these animals, and just behavioral shifts because of how their environments are affected. Kind of why it matters, the 3 main points you focused on were habitat fragmentation, which makes it harder for these animals to find food and shelter, and they can't really adapt to the impact of climate change as well. Water diversion, which reduces water availability for fish and wildlife, and it decreases their food, oxygen, and kind of just production. And pesticide use, which kind of just makes its way into their food chains
food chains, leading to poisoning and death. And so this is a map that we focused on, which kind of combines the ecosystem and wildlife. And it shows the impact of legal growth distribution on wildlife, specifically the Pacific fisher, the northern spotted owl, and the Humboldt martin. So the more like high to moderate cultivation sites overlap with 44.4% of the model fisher habitat, which is to the left, 47.9% of the highly susceptible spotted owl habitat, which is in the middle, and 39.9% of the Humboldt martin. So the kind of colors show the negative impacts of the illegal cultivation on these animals, which leads to kind of the greater detrimental effects I mentioned previously.
So then this is our second sector. I feel like they're all very intertwined. The nature sector obviously went into a little bit of that water degradation and the pollution in the water. And now Bella and Celeste are going to go into more about the legalization of water, historical water rights, and then just like the patterns that exist when it comes to growing cannabis in a farm, indoors, all that.
So what the water sector was looking at specifically was what are the water resources that are available to cannabis growers and how they can access them. So since cannabis is such a highly intensely water, like it uses so much water, and because surface water in California is already such a scarce resource due to drought, there is a growing reliance on groundwater resources, and groundwater can be easily overpumped and over extracted because there's a severe lack of hydrogeologic information out there on where these aquifers are and how far they extend. So what we're trying to look at is the legislative approaches already in place to help kind of mitigate this over extraction. So all water in California is dictated by SGMA and by prior appropriation. So the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act was enacted in 2014, and it requires all districts in California to create 20-year over extraction mitigation plans, or else the state will come in and intervene and take over that water right. So the issue is that a lot of these growers are in remote areas that are considered unincorporated. So that means that their water isn't managed municipally. So they can get away with a lot of unregulated extraction. And then also prior appropriation allocates all the water rights for California on a first come first served doctrine. So that means that a lot of growers tend to avoid legalization because they want to try to preserve their water rights that they've inherited for ever since California has been around. So when we're looking at solutions to over extraction, we have to keep in mind the specific identity of the independent grower, because we have two different types of operations we found. We have outdoor and indoor. And so for outdoor, we see a lot less a lot more water usage per plant. But overall, indoor operations are a lot more intensive because they're set up in a greenhouse sort of style, so they can expand a lot more into the forest. And this also means that they have a lot denser concentration of plants within the greenhouse, and they can extend their extraction well past the growing season. So this creates a year-round demand that's really intensely impacts water usage. So when we're looking at solutions in the future, we want to be really investigating storage practices and how we can get those implemented in either type of operation.
Yeah, so we found that looking between permitted and unpermitted water extraction practices, that there were distinct patterns between them. So specifically on the figure on the right, it showed the differences between the water extractions. And so in the unpermitted one, there's a higher usage in more watersheds. Specifically, a third of them are just located in 10. And on the other hand, permitted watersheds use less water and less volume. For water storage, the unpermitted farms are given increased water storage, which they can use during the wet season, which is to make sure they don't use a lot of water during the dry season when the cannabis plants are being watered. And for unpermitted farms, they have limited storage, which means they have to draw water during the wet season.
And a lot of the time that when they're extracting water, they're taking it from streams and rivers that don't have any sort of regulation, and there's no overflow protections on these, which contributes to water waste. Overall, there is a data gap between this though, because a lot of unpermitted farms like to stay on the low, and so they don't want to be caught. So there is a big data gap, especially coming from the recent legalization of cannabis.
So in the future, as we're doing our research, we want to be breaking it down our data geographically because each county will have a different set of regulations for the water and different consumption patterns. So here we'll be looking at the Eel River, which is in Mendocino County, and we found it to be 10 times lower in the cannabis growing season than when it's in the off season. So this is really like shocking because only one crop alone was able to decimate the stream flow. And it does this through typical side effects of agricultural operations. You tend to see a lot of soil degradation, mainly from roads being built by clear cutting redwoods in these areas to get to the farms themselves because there's no infrastructure in these areas. And then those roads aren't maintained, and then it creates soil and sediment runoff into the streams due to weathering, and that brings a lot of fertilizer runoff with it. And then as a result, the stream flow is decreased because the bed kind of builds up from the bottom as sedimentation occurs.
Yeah, so on the figure on the right, we focus really on looking at the risk zones between how close they are in accordance to illegal cannabis farms. So specifically, there's low, medium, and high risk. And the high risk ones are closest to the ones with the most fertilizer runoff, which causes a lot of algal blooms, which is toxic to the salmon in the area. And as of now, the EPA has not passed any cannabis pesticide regulations or any legalizations on this, but we think it's good to look at this as a case study for other solutions, like using more organic fertilizers and ones that don't cause algal blooms, and also maybe moving the cannabis farms about 200 feet from the stream so that they don't pollute them.
So we mentioned nature, we mentioned water, and all of that really, like I said, intersects with all different parts of the environment. With that said, we're part of the environment. Humans are extremely affected by a lot of the water pollution, like we were talking about, and like even species like fish that are getting affected. There's just so many issues that we are like interlinked with. So Tiffany and Mia will be talking about the urban sector and just how that impacts socially, economically, and culturally.
Yeah, so taking a look at an overview of the socioeconomic and environmental impacts of the cannabis industry and how kind of it impacts the communities in urban areas is just that a lot of times with manufacturing, there's it's a lot of work with highly volatile substances. So this makes high risk of explosions. And this also brings us to labor health and safety risks. So and on top of just the risk of explosions, there's also air pollution that comes with it, which I'll cover in environmental. But on top of that, even though at a state level it is been legalized, at a federal level it's still prohibited. So this prevents a lot of marginalized communities that want to kind of benefit from the businesses from in the cannabis industry to receive proper financial resources, and it makes them often turn to kind of like illegal or not proper or not kind of like not good deals, just signing a lot of contracts that put them in worse financial situations. And a lot of times the communities that live near cannabis cultivation areas are displaced just because they want to kind of expand the industry and operations. And if they don't leave, they're often just placed in diesel death zones just from the kind of the resources that are used in the cannabis industry. And with that, just kind of like talking about how diesel death zones are created. These are often just with operations, they rely on diesel and just kind of inefficient and underutilized energy generation and storage. So this just impacts, this is not very good for the community and for the environment. And also just from the light pollution from outdoor and indoor cultivation is heavy. And yeah, with high energy consumption from indoor cultivation, heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and lighting, there's just a lot of pollution with both light and air. And then to go into kind of a case study at a place, just a very familiar place, the Oakland Green Zone, just to kind of look at the history. Oakland has historically been very marginalized with the communities that have been fighting for like legalization, and with like at a federal level, people like prosecuting Oakland and a lot of facilities, cannabis facilities that are within Oakland. So with now that cannabis is legalized, there have been programs to kind of give back to the community that have been harmed by the federal level of prosecution. Yeah, so to kind of look at the cannabis equity program, it ensures that communities that are disproportionately ensnared can profit by the legalization by providing them technical assistance and financial resources. This can include permits, grants, interest-free loans, and other services such as reduced permit fees. This is specifically for people who live in areas that have been kind of targeted by the federal government for like over 10 years, and also GRASS, which is a program for gaining resources to achieve sustainable success. So this is kind of like helping cannabis businesses build and establish kind of a sustainable business so that they can continue to achieve financial success and get back from the community. Yeah, but with these kind of benefits, there also comes unregulated impacts, or just impacts that need to kind of be looked at and fixed for kind of true financial and technical like growth in the community. So with that, it's just the main things that we looked at is just there's a long wait for resource distribution. So a lot of times community members or people who are trying to get resources from the cannabis equity program are not receiving their resources in time, and they often have to kind of pay upfront for a lot of like taxes or things when they were promised to receive kind of resources for that. This also just is like a general kind of thing that we saw was that high taxes, there was overcharging, and a lot of just still permit fees that are pushed out onto smaller businesses. So this can look like something called an incubator model that they've pushed out to smaller businesses, where kind of they work out of bigger facilities along with other smaller businesses or other businesses. So they're just working in like they don't have to rent out. It's kind of like renting out a bigger facility so that they don't have like, they have like the resources of a bigger facility without having to pay all that like kind of operation fees. However, even though they are promised to not pay that operating fees, a lot of times smaller businesses still pay the same fees as kind of higher operating businesses that they're working with. So this is just kind of like a shortcoming in the incubator model, and just like overall paying increased fees or kind of disproportionately being affected by cannabis related burglaries, that they have to pay upfront for security improvements and any like repair improvements from any burglaries. And moving on, we're going to kind of look at how Indigenous communities are being affected by the cannabis cultivation.
So this case study focuses on the very unique impacts of cannabis cultivation on Native American communities and their ecosystems. So to give some background, here's some tribal cannabis legislation that I felt was important as background. Before I talk about these memorandums are no longer enacted. They were rescinded under the Trump administration. However, we found that federal prosecutors do tend to still follow these memorandums. So I do feel like it is important to mention, but currently there are no guidelines on which cannabis crimes should be federally prosecuted, both on a state level and on tribal land. So basically the Cole Memorandum was enacted in order to discourage federal prosecution of cannabis crimes unless they violated a certain set of laws, which were all very based in like public safety, which involved don't sell cannabis to minors, and cannabis crimes involving like firearms. But it was unclear how that memorandum applied to tribal land. So the Wilkinson memo then applied that guideline to tribal lands and discouraged prosecution on tribal lands. Public Law 280, which relates to that figure up there, allows states to assume criminal jurisdiction on tribal land. And in PL 280, mandatory states, which as you can see in the figure is California, states are required to assume criminal jurisdiction on tribal land, which is a direct violation of tribal sovereignty, largely contributes to the lack of funding for tribal law enforcement, and overall just increases the power that the federal government tends to have over Native American communities. Now, on the topic of tribal run cannabis businesses, it is a very, very lucrative economic opportunity for many tribes who have been put, after years and years of systemic abuse, into extreme poverty. But many tribes are not involved in the cannabis industry. And even though they are not subject to state income tax, which increases their profit margins widely. They are hesitant to enter the market due to the lack of federal protections because they are not protected by state business protections, which means they are subject to federal raids, which are, as we found, very common with among tribes, especially in Northern California, where I want to talk about an example, which is the Pitt River tribe, which was running a medical marijuana program on their reservation for 3 months, completely in accordance with state guidelines. It was written into their own laws, and they were raided by the federal government in a very violent manner. Many members of the Pitt River tribe were subject to police brutality. A lot of product was confiscated from the Pitt River tribe, and confidential patient records were confiscated during this raid. And when the Pitt River tribe asked the U.S. Attorney's Office what they violated in order to warrant that raid, they refused the answer. So obviously that explains why many tribes do not want to enter the cannabis market, because there's no protections and they could get raided at any moment for really no reason. So there is also a large problem about illegal grows or trespass grows on native land, which is when outside growers will come onto native land and set up illegal grows, because native land is very favorable, both in growing conditions due to lack of like urban obstruction and industrial obstruction, and also there's a lack of police presence and monitoring because their law enforcement is severely underfunded. And these grows have detrimental impacts on the communities and ecosystems that they're cultivated in, mainly that they diverge large amounts of water, the fertilizer runoff poisons the water and aquatic community, and also toxic pesticides kill lots of wildlife. And that has caused the U.S. Forestry Service to conduct these raids, which are sometimes warranted when, in the case of these illegal grows, and they have to raid these illegal grows and clean up the large amounts of waste, often hazardous, that they leave behind. And an example I want to talk about is Operation Yurok, which involved the Yurok tribe of Northern California, which the Yurok tribe were experiencing a significant decrease in quality of life in both their ecosystem and just overall community life due to rampant illegal grows on their land. Water divergence had decreased the amount of available drinking water they had. It also disrupted cultural activities such as dancing, hunting, and gathering. And it also significantly affected their salmon population, which are very spiritually important to them. And essentially, the water divergence lowered the water temperature. Cannabis cultivation also tends to raise water temperature, which makes it very hard for salmon to live there. And also the pesticides and fertilizer runoff has killed an abundance of wildlife, which kind of works in a chain where if one animal is poisoned, then another animal will eat that poisoned animal, and it just causes massive ecosystem fallout. And there are even cases within the Yurok tribe of fishermen eating poisoned fish and dying. So in a way, illegal cannabis cultivation is directly killing people who rely on that land, and it is extremely, extremely destructive. And I wanted to make a note at the end of my section to say that while ineffective legislature and government incompetencies do contribute greatly to the effects and impacts that Native American people face from cannabis cultivation, it is not the cause. The causes are much deeper and much more systemic. The cannabis industry is just another industry that relies on the exploitation of Native people and their land in order for settler profit. I think that that shouldn't deter us from researching or trying to help solve these problems, but I think when it comes down to it, these problems are not solvable. Capitalism and settler colonialism is built on the expectation of the destruction of Native communities in order for the profit of the settler nation, which is now currently us in the US. So I think while we can help these people, we can help Native American communities, and we can lessen the impacts they feel. In no way are we possible of solving the problems they feel from cannabis cultivation, and all other industries of the US economy.
So with all that said, we've had just such a broad, we started off with just such a broad question, and it really narrowed down to so many intricate issues and so many intricate just consequences of cannabis farming. So with that said, we are hoping to take this foundational and fundamental research that we've done and just the findings that we've had this semester, and really use it kind of as, I keep using this phrase, but like planting the seeds for next semester. I think that with all the presentation, with this whole presentation that we've given you all today, and just like other research that we've done in our project outline, which we'll talk about soon, it could really help us move into semester 2 and really incorporate some of that external research, and kind of like, I know that, what was I gonna say? No, in Northern California, we are in such a hub of all these types of issues and all these types of sectors that I think external research and community engagement will really help us in semester 2 to hear and uplift some of those stakeholder voices. So nature, water, and urban all have, these are just some ideas that we have for next semester. But I think that this will be beneficial in both creating some sustainable solutions for farmers, but also just hearing people who are like directly impacted and getting more of those stakeholder voices and building those case studies and hearing more about the people in our community. No, our final deliverable is like a report outline, and it will be on surgberkeley.com.edu soon. Any questions?
I have a question for people in the water group. I was wondering if you like looked at other common crops in California and how like water use and fertilizer and pesticide runoff like compared between them and cannabis.
Yeah, so definitely, I didn't look so much as fertilizer, but cannabis is like, does consume a lot more water than like corn or alfalfa or wheat do, and that those are like some of the biggest crops in the US. So it's something like 27 gallons per like a bunch of, I forget the units, but it's like definitely it's several times more than like standard cash crops intake. Yeah.
So you learn cannabis, like what part of the world it's living from, or
Great question.
Isn't it Southeast Asia?
Yeah.
Southeast Asia. It just depends, because there's like medicinal cultivation, and then there's like actual drug use cultivation.
Yeah.
So I feel like it differs, but there was like a huge, what was it called, green rush or something like that came to the US. Probably Southeast Asia.
Yeah, I think in the original report you had to show like the entire history.
Oh,
of
okay.
it.
Right.
So we have resources for you if you. Yes.
Yeah, I have a similar question. Do you guys think that like using these much kind of water will change the evapotranspiration of like normal crops using like similar lens before or after changing local or like regional climate stuff? Because as you mentioned, using more water than alfalfa, and alfalfa itself is alternating climate as it
Yes.
happens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that, sorry, I think it's also to do with like cannabis being relatively new, so it's hard to get a lot of that data. It's more visualization towards the future because like, you know, crops like corn and stuff have been around forever and we use it in such a high capacity, but for cannabis, it's so recent and still a lot of them are unpermitted and illegal, so we can't really see towards the future. But with the data, if they grow that big, it could be potentially dangerous.
Yeah, I think grows are also pretty localized right now. It's normally just one or two farmers having their own personal plot. So that's definitely something to look into. Right now, I don't think, it's gonna be as expansive as some of those other crops, but in Northern California, it is primary crop. So maybe in a more localized region, that would be something to look into. Yeah.
I have a question on the emissions part of this presentation. The talking about the way that, illegal farming on native land, has impacted indigenous people. In my mind brings up like how, like Western farming practices as opposed to indigenous land care practices, the way that Western farming practices are very extractive in their relationship with the land. So I'm wondering if you see like cannabis farming using indigenous land care practices or practiced by indigenous people could be a path toward indigenous sovereignty or like decarbonization, food justice, climate justice.
Yeah, I think the illegal grows done on tribal lands are generally some of the most destructive farming practices you could engage in. It's really insanely horrible, and it's because they're super unregulated. No one knows about them. It kind of doesn't matter. Like they just like leave a bunch of trash everywhere. Like even taking like normal farming sustainable solutions would help significantly. And I think obviously in implementing more sustainable farming practice would overall help the environment. But the main problem with these illegal grows is that no one knows about them, no one's watching over them, and there's no regulations being applied to them. So I think, yes, that is a solution, but the main problem now is that there's no one looking over it, there's no one monitoring it, there's no regulations being followed. So yeah.
Guys, and let's give another round of applause for all our surgeons. All right, so I sent a message to everyone in the Zoom recording that our presentation time has ended, but if you want to stick around for a recap of our semester, we did a lot of fun socials. Yeah, here's us at Taco Tuesday, always talking about Taco Tuesday, I feel like. As at our general meetings, we had a night hike session with the bird club at UC Berkeley, and we were trying to look for owls. We didn't see any, but it was really fun. Another social outside of class, and then a Zotero workshop too. So for SURG members, if you're interested in being part of the leadership team with me, Emma, Chelsea, and Priya, please let us know. And if you want to start your own research team or committee, let us know too. Here's our socials, and as Nicole was saying, we're going to upload all of our final deliverables onto our website.
Anyway, before we do this, I think we just wanted to thank the audience also for coming, and we're gonna have just a couple of minutes. I know everyone's been sitting for a long time, so feel free to grab a drink, grab some snacks, and audience, you can stay if you want, but thank you so much for coming. Thank you presenters for talking, and we're just gonna have a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll come back for 6 superlatives real quick.
Yeah. So yeah, audience member. Feel free to stay if you like for the silly superlatives we have, but also thank you for coming.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
We are the end. Go ahead. I think so.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.